Imagine for a second that you are a high-powered corporate executive. Like you have spent 2 decades building your career.
Right, climbing the ladder.
Exactly. You manage hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. You oversee these vast, complex supply chains. You've got the corner office, the impressive title, the leverage, all of it.
The whole package.
Yeah, the whole package. And then suddenly, it is 2:00 a.m. on a freezing winter night in Montreal, and you are working the night shift in a warehouse.
Oh, wow.
You are pulling manual pallet jacks, breathing in diesel fumes, and your entire professional worth is being measured strictly by, like, how many cardboard boxes you can wrap in a single hour?
It is just, it's a staggering contrast, honestly.
Yeah.
And it strips away every single illusion of control a person might have about how a business actually operates.
Today, we are exploring a scenario that I think almost all of us have lived through in some form. You know, you've got this highly successful team or maybe a major project that is just humming along perfectly.
Eating all the target.
Right, hitting targets, everyone's happy. And then the star leader, the person who seemingly holds the whole thing together, they go on vacation for 2 weeks or they leave the company entirely. And what happens?
It all crashes down.
Almost instantly. The entire thing just falls apart. Deadlines get missed, the quality drops, and people just start pointing fingers.
Because the immediate, the knee-jerk reaction in those moments is always to blame the individuals. We tell ourselves, oh, we have a people problem.
Yeah, we blame the team for not stepping up.
Exactly. Or we panic and frantically try to hire another hero to step in and save the day. But that fundamental assumption is flawed. When an organization only functions because a specific person happens to be in the room, you don't actually have a system. You have a dependency.
A dependency. That is a great way to put it.
Yeah, because the chaos isn't a people problem. It's a design problem.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the core philosophy of a really fascinating text called Leading the System by Mauricio Jamaica Telechea.
It's a brilliant framework.
It really is. And the goal here is to figure out how to stop relying on those heroic individuals and instead build systems that are architectural, not positional. And whether you are stepping in to lead some massive corporate turnaround or you're listening to this right now and you just want to stop putting out frantic daily fires in your own team, this architecture applies.
It requires a profound shift in how we understand stability, I think. Because positional authority, the title on your business card that can force temporary action.
Sure, people listen to the boss.
Right. And a charismatic leader can generate short-term momentum. But only architecture creates real, sustainable stability. Telechea's core premise is simple but brutal, honestly. If control disappears the moment a specific person is missing, it was never control in the first place.
It was just a person.
Exactly, it was just a person.
To really get our heads around how to build this architecture, we first have to strip away everything that everything that looks like a system but actually isn't. And Telechea gives us this incredibly raw look at what that means through a concept he calls the zero moment.
Yeah, the zero moment. It's what happens when all of your positional authority just completely evaporates. You are left with absolutely nothing but the structural reality of the situation.
Which goes back to the warehouse we talked about at the start.
Right. Telechea experienced this firsthand. By the time he was 43, he had built that massive executive career we mentioned earlier, operating out of Mexico. But in 2020, during the height of the global pandemic, he decided to start completely over.
Wow, just packed up and left?
Yeah, he immigrated to Canada. He arrived in Montreal during the winter with just 3 suitcases.
So he voluntarily walked away from the title and the network? He was back at absolute zero.
Absolute zero. And to support himself while he was studying in this new country, he took a job in what's known as a cross-dock warehouse.
And for those listening who might not know, a cross-dock facility isn't just a quiet place where goods are stored long-term, right?
Oh, not at all. It is a high-speed, high-pressure logistics hub. Trucks roll in, freight is rapidly unloaded, sorted, and then almost immediately loaded onto outbound trucks. It is just a relentless, fast-paced environment where speed is everything.
No desk, no computer screen, just concrete, cardboard, and cold air. But here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. Because of his executive background, he couldn't help but analyze the operation around him.
He had that analytical lens.
Right. Without the illusion of executive control, he started observing the mechanics of the warehouse from the floor level. And he noticed this glaring discrepancy in how people worked. He and a few others were working diligently, properly stacking and wrapping 4 or 5 pallets every single hour.
Which is hard physical labor.
Exactly. But just a few meters away, another worker was wrapping exactly 1 pallet an hour and doing a terrible job of it.
Yeah, boxes were stacked unevenly, leaning precariously. People were just disappearing for hour-long breaks with zero consequences. The workforce was completely disengaged.
Which must have been wild for him to see.
Oh, absolutely. And when Telechia finally asked one of his coworkers why he was stacking boxes, so carelessly pointing out that the unstable load would obviously damage the goods during transit, the coworkers simply shrugged and said, "It doesn't matter, as long as it leaves."
As long as it leaves. Okay, I have to push back on this a bit, though, because when I hear a story like that, my first instinct is that those specific workers were just lazy or cynical. I mean, they were intentionally doing a bad job. Doesn't that just point to a massive failure in hiring?
What's fascinating here is that it is so tempting to write it off as a bad hire or a lazy workforce. But what Telechia realized was much more unsettling for anyone in management. Those workers were not inherently lazy. They were completely, perfectly rational.
Rational. Wait, by doing the absolute bare minimum and breaking things, how is that rational?
Because they were responding exactly to the incentives designed into their environment. The system in that warehouse rewarded mere physical presence. It measured time, not quality output.
I see.
If you are paid the exact same hourly wage, whether you carefully wrap 5 pallets or carelessly wrap one, and there are absolutely no visible standards or consequences enforced, optimizing your effort to do the bare minimum is a highly logical response.
Okay, that makes sense. The supervisors were physically walking the floor, but they were just acting as bodies covering a shift. They weren't actually running the operation.
And that is the ultimate lesson of the Montreal warehouse. A world-class logistics company had designed a facility with highly sophisticated processes and expensive technology, but they completely failed to align human behavior to those processes.
So they had the tools, but not the architecture.
Exactly. The chaos on the floor wasn't a lack of effort, it was a design flaw. It proved that you cannot just mandate performance or demand that people care. You have to build an architecture that makes consistent execution the path of least resistance.
So if we know that screaming at people to work harder doesn't work, and if this chaos is genuinely a design flaw, how do you actually design it right? Like if I'm a leader staring at a completely dysfunctional team, where do I physically start building this architecture?
This is where we move from the philosophy to the actual blueprint.
Oh.
Teleke uses a map he calls the flow of demand. The idea is that you have to map the operational backbone of your organization, the literal sequence of how value gets delivered to your customer. He divides this flow into 8 sequential areas.
Okay, let's walk through this, but rather than just reading down a list of dry business terms, let's ground this in a scenario. Let's say we run a custom electric bicycle company.
Great example.
How does the flow of demand actually move for our bike shop?
Well, we start with Area 1, which is customer service and demand flow. This is the entry point. It's how the order actually enters your system and how you interpret what the customer wants and when they want it.
So in our bicycle company, this is the sales team taking an order for a custom red e-bike, promising delivery in, say, 3 weeks.
Exactly. Then the momentum shifts to Area 2, which is material planning. This is translating that specific demand into actual requirements. We look at the order and say, okay, we need a frame, a battery, and a very specific shade of red paint.
Which immediately triggers Area 3, right? Procurement.
Spot on. Procurement is the act of actually going out into the market, negotiating, and buying that red paint and that specific battery.
Okay, so then the physical materials arrive, which moves us into Area 4, operational planning. Like, how do we turn these raw supplies into a daily work schedule on the factory floor?
Yes, and that feeds right into Area 5, warehouse and inventory management. You're making sure that when the mechanic reaches for the red paint on Tuesday morning, it is actually sitting on the shelf, not lost somewhere in a loading bay.
Got it. Then Area 6 is production. This is where the rubber meets the road. Literally, the mechanic actually builds the bicycle.
Right. And Area 7 is quality assurance. You're testing the brakes, making sure the red paint isn't scratched before it goes in the shipping box.
And finally, Area 8, logistics. Getting the finished bicycle onto a truck and delivering it to the customer's front door.
Exactly. Now, the critical insight here isn't merely that these 8 distinct functions exist. The magic is in the rule of sequence. Every single area strictly depends on the output of the one right before it. The flow only moves in one direction.
So if Area 1 makes a mistake, say, The sales team promises that custom-read bike in 1 week instead of 3 without actually checking reality. That error doesn't just stay in
Oh, it
sales.
cascades. It propagates down the entire line. Because sales misread the demand, procurement in Area 3 has to pay triple for rush shipping on the paint. Production in Area 6 has to work mandatory overtime, leading to exhaustion.
And inevitably, it becomes a massive burning emergency in Area 8, manifesting as a late delivery or a furious customer. It's exactly like a relay race.
Yes.
It really doesn't matter how fast your anchor runner is, which would be logistics in this case. If your very first runner, demand, drops the baton or runs into the stands, the race is over. You simply cannot outsprint a dropped baton.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And yet, think about human nature. When the baton is dropped, where do most leaders focus their anger?
On the guy holding the baton at the end.
Right, on the anchor runner. They yell at logistics for being late or production for being slow when the structural failure actually happened weeks earlier at the entry point of demand.
But I can hear someone listening to this right now thinking, well, this is great if you run a factory, but I work at a digital marketing agency or a boutique consulting firm. I don't have a manufacturing floor or warehouse. Does this 8-area map still apply to me?
It absolutely applies.
Yeah.
And that assumption is one of the biggest traps in modern business. The framework is universal because the function must exist, even if you call it something else or if you outsource it entirely.
Right, so in a digital agency, inventory isn't a pile of bicycle parts. It's your bench of available graphic designers and their specific available hours.
Exactly.
And production is the actual coding or designing of the website. Procurement is recruiting or hiring specialized freelance copywriters for a specific campaign.
Precisely that. If a digital agency ignores material planning, which for them means forecasting how many video editors they will need next month based on signed contracts, they end up scrambling.
They're constantly behind.
Yeah. If an area is missing or ignored, informal workarounds immediately sprout up. Account managers start begging designers to work weekends. Downstream chaos ensues.
So we've mapped out these 8 sequential areas, but having the map clearly isn't enough to prevent the chaos. Because if we think back to the Montreal warehouse, they had a logistics area. They had production and inventory.
Add all the pieces.
Right, the areas existed, but the facility was still failing. So just having the blueprint doesn't guarantee success. We need a way to evaluate the health of each area.
And this brings us to the diagnostic lens Telechia uses, which is the 3 critical dimensions. Every single one of the 8 areas we just mapped out must be evaluated across 3 distinct dimensions.
Okay, what are they?
First, people and culture.
Yeah.
Second, processes. And third, technology and infrastructure.
Let me stop you right there, because here's where it gets really interesting to me. Whenever business leaders talk about culture, it is almost always treated as this soft, separate HR initiative.
Oh, 100%.
It's pizza parties on Fridays or an open concept office or some vague mission statement laminated on the break room wall.
Which is entirely the wrong paradigm.
Huh.
In Telechia's system, culture is deeply, profoundly structural. It is the foundation that determines whether a standard holds up when things get difficult or inconvenient.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like a smartphone.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, your technology and infrastructure is the physical hardware, right? The microchips, the battery, the glass screen. Your processes are the apps you download to do specific tasks, like your calendar or your email app. But culture is the underlying operating system. It's iOS or Android.
I love that.
If the operating system is fundamentally corrupted, it doesn't matter how expensive the hardware is or how beautifully designed the apps are. The whole device is going to freeze and crash.
That is exactly how these dimensions interact. Let's apply your smartphone analogy back to the Montreal warehouse. If we look at their 3 dimensions, they actually had great processes. The logistics apps were well designed. They knew exactly how a truck should be
They were
loaded.
making it up as they went.
Right. They also had excellent technology and infrastructure. We are talking about world-class enterprise software systems, tracking freight movements across the entire continent.
Just to clarify for our listeners, when we talk about enterprise software and logistics, we're usually talking about an ERP, right? Enterprise Resource Planning Software. Basically, it's the massive digital central nervous system a company uses to track every piece of inventory, manage payroll, and monitor operations in real time.
Right. They had the expensive hardware and the great apps. But the operating system, the people and culture dimension, was completely corrupted. Excellent technology and well-designed processes, when operated by people who are actively avoiding accountability, will still produce absolute chaos.
So how do you fix the operating system? If culture isn't a pizza party, what is it structurally?
Talachia mentions 3 specific conditions needed for a culture to actually sustain a system, doesn't he?
He does. He identifies them as belonging, visibility, and consequence clarity.
Let's break those down.
Sure, belonging means the team feels seen and valued. They are invested in the success of the system because the system is demonstrably invested in them. Visibility means standards are physically observable. You cannot enforce a standard if no one can actually see when it has been broken.
That makes total sense.
And consequence clarity means there are real, immediate outcomes for both following and ignoring the standard.
This connects directly back to that worker carelessly wrapping the single pallet in Montreal. There was no consequence clarity for his poor work, so he didn't care.
Why would he?
Right. The consequence was completely disconnected from his daily reality. It would just result in a damaged box for some disappointed customer 1,000 miles away weeks later. Exactly. When a system lacks those 3 behavioral conditions, it doesn't just produce chaos randomly. It actively calibrates itself to the lowest minimum visible standard. People optimize for the design they are placed in.
Okay, so let's say you're a leader and you do the incredibly hard work. You map out your 8 areas of demand flow. You evaluate and align the 3 dimensions. You tighten the processes. You upgrade the tech. And you build a structural culture based on belonging, visibility, and consequence clarity.
You've built the whole machine.
Yeah, but how do you know you've actually won? What is the metric that proves the system is finally working?
This brings us to the final and psychologically the most challenging phase of the entire framework, institutionalizing the system. Talachia argues that you judge the ultimate success of your architecture by looking at how the team interacts with it when you aren't forcing them to.
When you step away.
Yes. He identifies 3 distinct levels of a team's relationship to the system.
The first level is being in the system.
Yes. This is the completely unengaged group. They are physically present, much like those Montreal warehouse workers, but they are operationally absent. They do the absolute bare minimum required to not get fired. The system exists around them, but it does not flow through them.
The second level is following the system. Now, at first glance, this sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
It is a massive improvement, for sure, but it is a trap. Teams at level 2 are compliant. They follow the standard. They hit their targets. They utilize the processes. But, and this is a massive caveat, they are entirely dependent on the leader to maintain that momentum.
So they only do it if they're being watched.
They do it because the leader's watching, or because the leader is constantly driving the daily cadence.
Okay, if you're listening to this right now and you find yourself checking your work email on a Saturday morning because your team simply cannot make a minor operational decision without your explicit approval, your team is stuck at level 2.
Without a doubt.
Which perfectly describes the star leader goes on vacation scenario we started the show with. The team was following the system, but they didn't own it. Which leads us to the final level.
Level 3 is owning the system. This is the gold standard. This happens when the individuals on the team internalize the logic behind the processes. When a problem arises, they don't just escalate it to the boss, they route it correctly and solve it themselves.
They hold each other accountable.
Exactly. When a new person joins the team, it is the peers who teach them the standard, not the manager. The system has become completely self-correcting.
So what does this all mean for the ambitious leader? The ultimate standard of success in Talachaya's framework is your ability to step back. The test is, if you leave tomorrow, will the system continue to run in exactly the same way?
That's the real test.
But I'll be honest, if my goal is to actively make myself obsolete to the daily operation, that sounds absolutely terrifying for my career security. Why would any leader want to engineer their own irrelevance?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it sounds entirely counterintuitive to how we are traditionally taught to view value. We naturally tie our professional worth to being needed, to being the hero who puts out the fire.
Right, everyone wants to be the hero.
But it changes how we define leadership entirely. Functionally, yes, you must make your daily presence unnecessary to the core operation. But that doesn't make you irrelevant. It actually proves your ultimate competence.
Because if you have to be in the weeds every single day, directing traffic, you haven't actually built a system. You've just built an exhausting dependency on yourself.
The leader who must be present in every operational detail is a bottleneck, restricting the growth of the company to the size of their own personal energy reserves.
And nobody has unlimited energy.
Exactly. By institutionalizing the system, by building it so flawlessly that the team owns it and the architecture bears the weight, you free yourself. You transition from being the motor of the operation, constantly burning your own fuel, to being its architect.
You stop fighting the daily fires, and you finally have the time to design fireproof buildings.
That is the ultimate transfer of power. You step back so you can absorb external pressures, set long-term strategy, and focus on the high-level visionary work that only the leader can do. It is the only way an organization truly scales. The system no longer belongs to the person who built it, it belongs to the people who operate it.
This entire framework is such a paradigm shift. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've just taken today. We started with the jarring realization that true control must be architectural, not positional.
We saw in that freezing Montreal warehouse that systems strictly dictate human behavior, that rational people will always optimize for the design they are placed in.
We then mapped the operational flow using the 8 sequential areas of demand, recognizing that a dropped baton at the entry point of customer service will inevitably wreck logistics at the finish line.
We looked through the diagnostic lens of the 3 dimensions, people and culture, processes and technology, learning that culture isn't a perk, it's the underlying operating system that holds everything together.
And finally, we discovered that the ultimate success metric for a leader isn't how frantically they work, but whether they possess the ego suppression required to build a system that simply doesn't need them anymore.
It challenges everything we think we know about being indispensable.
So to you listening right now, think about your own daily work. Look at the chaos in your department. Look at the missed deadlines, the frantic Friday afternoon emails, the burnout. Do not look at it as a lack of effort from your team. Look at it as a design flaw. It is an architectural gap just waiting to be engineered properly.
This raises an important final question for you to mull over. Calachea's philosophy leaves us with a haunting truth. Organizations do not behave according to their intentions, they behave according to their architecture.
That's a powerful thought.
Look closely at your current life, your team, or your business. If it perfectly reflects its underlying architecture right now, what hidden structural debt are you carrying?
What weak processes, cultural gaps, or exhausting manual workarounds are you currently holding together through sheer force of will? Because if a sudden zero moment stripped away your title, your leverage, or your presence tomorrow, what brutal realities would that X-ray machine finally expose? Until next time, keep diving deep.